First of all, welcome. Glad you all could make it. This looks like a fun group. Some of my most favorite people. Welcome. So we're going to talk about smart gadgets. Literally one of my favorite things to talk about of everything there is to talk about. So you're in the right place. I'm Tad Giles. I'm currently the CTO, but I was formerly the general manager of the Build business unit. Build's kind of my baby. I wrote some of the first lines of code and I helped foster it through the whole like, hey, maybe this should be a product and maybe it shouldn't. And well, yes, let's build a product and then let's get a team and let's start selling it and work through all that until now we're where we're at, where we have a business, we have customers and it's growing and the product's better every week. And that's where we're at. So let's talk about smart gadgets. Actually, one little more thing about housekeeping. I'd like this to be semi-interactive. So please feel free to like raise your hand. And if you have a question midstream, I'd rather answer the questions like while we're there on a screen or on a topic contextually. And so feel free to do that. Just be wise and careful with your microphone and all those types of things. But yes, please feel free to ask questions as I go through. So I'm going to talk about smart gadgets. And when you're designing a form, there's lots of different considerations, but two really important considerations are, one, you want that experience for the person using the form to be as easy and simple as possible. You want to simplify that experience for them. You also want your data to be as accurate as possible. So that's an important part of collecting data, is you want accurate data that you can that helps achieve the purposes of that given form and that given process. So smart gadgets help us solve those problems. They allow us to autofill fields on the form, simplifying data entry and improving accuracy. They also allow us to create searchable fields on the form that allow us to search against other systems and to create drop-downs on the form. And all of this they do with data from other systems. So smart gadgets are the way we connect data from other systems into our forms. And that's the problem that smart gadgets solve. So as an example, here's a program change request form that's standard. Each of these, it has nice text fields, but they're all just simple text fields. And so that makes it so that the student filling this out has to fill out every one of these fields. And there's lots of potential for error when they do that. And with smart gadgets, when I replace those things with smart gadgets, then I have the student's name can be automatically looked up based on their login and filled out for them. Their advisor could be automatically identified in their student record and automatically filled in for them. Their current program or programs can be automatically loaded from their student record to know what their current load is. We can search against against our curriculum management system or our other system of record for curriculum, and find and select a program by its accurate official name. And we can automatically load and fill the department that's associated with that program. So smart gadgets make all of this, make it all a lot simpler for the user to fill out the form and allows us to make it more accurate. Those are our key things we're accomplishing there. So we're going to build that program change request. And to start with, we have data sources. So when I refer to like, I'm going to put this smart gadget on that I'm going to show you in just a second, and I connect it to a data source. These are the data sources I'm going to use for the program change request. These are things that are already set up for me by my technical staff. And so they're just available to those people who are creating forms and designing forms. And so we have a data source for student information that allows me to query and say, for a given student ID, please return the student record. We have another one for current programs, which is for a given student ID, give me the list of programs for that specific student. And we have another data source that's connecting to, in this case, Kuali Curriculum Management, to give us a searchable list where I can search against active programs that are available. So those three data sources are like the foundation that I need in place in order to build the form that I'm about to build. So I'm going to jump over here and start a new thing, and we're going to call it Program Change Request. And we'll choose an icon, and I like pink, and we'll get to our form. And so I'm going to pop a section on here and call it Program Change Requests. And then we're going to start adding gadgets. And so the smart gadgets are here on the left, and they're down here at the bottom of the left gadgets that we have. And there's three different ones. One is a data lookup for a single item. So this is looking up, in this case, in this first case, I'm going to look up a student record and get the student's name. So it's a single item where I'm wanting one thing. The data lookup list is about getting a list of things or a searchable list of things. And data lookup multi-select is like the list in that it allows me to access a list, but it allows me to select multiple items in that list. And then submitted by is the very simplest gadget that allows us to just automatically identify the logged in user and enter their name on the form. So in this example, I'm going to start with the data lookup single item gadget. And we're going to rename that to student. And then I can choose my data source. And if you remember, we talked about those data sources that we had. And I have a student information data source that was already created. And it's going to need a student ID in order to identify which student to load. So I'm going to hit continue. And then over here in my configuration, it's going to prompt me for, well, where do we get that student ID? We need to feed that information from the form to the other system in order to get that student record. And so we're going to connect that to, in this case, created by school ID. So this is going to be the unique ID, the student ID that's on the logged in user. And in this case, it's automatically identifying Jamie Smith as the logged in user. Next thing we wanted to know was to access her advisor. And so Jamie's advisor is in some additional information. Over here on the left, I have this additional control called Add Linked Autofilled Gadgets. And when I open that, I can see that with this data lookup, there's additional data that's available from that student record that I can add to the form. And in this case, I'm going to drag the advisor field out onto here, and you're going to see that it's automatically going to look up and load Jamie's advisor. And that's how we connect those two together. So this allows us to pull additional data, not just one piece of information, but we can pull multiple items. One really important distinction here is whether you add this gadget to the form or not, this data is being added to the underlying data of the form and will be available in your workflow and in your document list. So that data will be, so for instance, you may not have to show GPA on the form, but you may use GPA in the workflow to validate that their GPA has to be above a certain level in order to qualify for the application that they're applying for. So you can do business logic and use this information in the workflow, even if it's not showing on the form. It's still getting added to the underlying data. So then we wanted to list current programs or program, and I'm going to pull a data lookup list this time. And we're going to say current program, and we'll choose from another data source. And if I look down this list, I have that data source that we talked about called current programs. And it's prompting for a student ID again. I'm going to continue. It again is looking for, where do I get that student ID from this form? And we're again going to look at that school ID, school ID for the created by. And you'll see that it's automatically pulling in Jamie's current programs, that she's a dual major with English and mathematics. Next, we want to pull up the requested program, the one that they want to change to. So we're going to pull another data lookup list. And we're going to call this requested program. And we'll choose a source. And when I come down here, I can choose curriculum management programs. And so this is that data source that's connecting to, in this case, Kuali curriculum management, but it could connect to a variety of different sources. And we're going to put that on there, and then we'll see that I can now search and find, I'm hitting against my curriculum management to pull that list, and I can search and find the requested program that I want to change to. We also want that department for that piece. And so if I look at that add linked autofill gadgets piece again, I'll see there's additional information that's coming from that program. And I'm going to drop in department in this case. And so now when I select that history degree, it'll automatically fill in with department. And finally, for good form, we want them to tell us why they're doing this. So we'll add an extra field for reason for change. And so when we preview the form, you'll see that when Jamie comes to this, it automatically knows who she is, knows her advisor, knows what her current programs are, so she can select one. She can type and search and find that history degree, and automatically it knows who the department is. This makes the form far easier for her to fill out, and allows us to capture way more accurate data for the information that's being captured. The important thing I want to point out is that I hope you're finding this relatively simple and easy to understand. If you're not technical, we're connecting to other systems, but you're able to pull these things from these existing data sources, put them onto the control, do a little bit of configuration, and you're connecting these things together and making your form a lot more richer and powerful. Any questions about that at this point?
Yeah, if I may. So when you're setting up those integrations, and maybe you'll talk about that later, or maybe this isn't the right session for that. But when you're setting up those integrations, like how easy is that for a department's IT team? Like, what kind of information is required? It's just like it's great and it looks fantastic, but I just want to know, like, what's the actual ease of, if I want to link to, for example, my Windows, domain server and my ADFS, can I do that? And how easy is it to do that?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm just about to get into that.
Perfect.
So I will we'll be looking at the technical stuff behind this in just a minute. Katie Sexton has a question about, for the current program dropdown, if you're getting two programs, is there a way that we could drop the data into another field type, like a checkbox or a type ahead or a radio button? Today, currently, no, but that is something we're looking at. We're listening to feedback, I guess. You know how I say that. And we're gathering information. But so today we can't do that. Today it ties to the drop down. But that is something I think we need to look at and consider in the future. And another person asked if a payment system like Moneris could be included. I think that's possible. It depends on the details of what that integration would look like and what you're trying to do with Moneris for a given thing. But we construct these integrations on the form side and on the workflow side in a way that they're as general purpose as possible, so that they can address connecting to a wide variety of systems. So that is theoretically possible. I have not seen or done that yet with Moneris specifically, but we have constructed in a way that is theoretically possible. So I'm going to jump over to my slides again, and we're going to talk about this back end piece. So what we just did there, put all those fields in the form, and I'm looking up data, and I'm linking other fields, and I'm auto-filling fields, and I'm doing that by connecting to other systems. that is a really technical, complicated thing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background that for the person constructing the form, they don't have to worry about that stuff. But there is someone who does, which is the technical person who has to set those things up. So there's a bunch of things happening on the back end, which is connecting to other systems. And this is the complexity that's like down below in the guts of Build. And so there you have to know about things like what a bearer token is and what JSON is and query parameters and URL parameters. And you have to know what an API is, and which is how computers talk to each other. And you have to be able to understand what all this stuff is here in the middle of the screen. So there's technical aptitude involved in connecting to these systems. So there is a technical configuration that has to be done at a separate level. And that's kind of the magic of what we did in Build, is we wanted to enable as many people as possible to really create these powerful forms. But in order to do that, we can't require technical expertise from everybody on campus. So we created this two-tier approach where the technical people can configure the complicated part down below, and then it's bubbled up in the form designer as these simple data sources that could be connected to fields on the form and connected that way. And so that's the way we've divided things. So on the left, we have like our authorized technical person who's in there configuring this backend API, and up front, or the person working with the form and building the form, they don't have to worry. They don't even have to know what the word API means. They can just access these gadgets and connect to these data sources and configure them, and they can do magical things that are actually doing really complicated technical things in the background. So let me show you what this is like. And so keep in mind, this is the technical part. We're not expecting everyone to be able to do this. This piece requires some technical aptitude about working with APIs. And so I'm going to go, you have to be a system administrator to be able to do this. And I'm going to go to system administration. And this is where the integrations are configured that are used across the system. And so we used that student information data source. And this is where that's defined. And so down here in this configuration, you can see that I have some different types, and I'm going to do the type that returns a single item. And so this is the one that's going to work with that data lookup single item gadget. You have to define an HTTP method. You have to define an integration URL. You'll see that this is we support URL parameters. So I can pass a variable, which if you remember, we needed a student ID to be able to pass to the underlying data source in order to retrieve that student record. In this case, I'm just working with dummy fake data. So there's no authentication in place, but you would always have authentication in place for a real world scenario. Down here is where I define that URL input, where I'm saying we're going to prompt for a parameter, and that'll be required in order to fill this form out. If you needed to add custom headers to pass additional information to this server to make that work, you can add those here. And then this is where we define the outputs. So remember that list of gadgets that are available that I can link and autofill data from. This is where those are defined and where they're pulled back. And this capability also has the ability I can run a test. And so if I type in a student ID, you'll see that it hits that. You'll see this is what that's going to look like on the form. And here's the additional data that's being loaded by autofilled that made available to the form. Down below, if you want to see the nitty gritty of what actually came back from the other server, you can look at that, see the headers and the status and the body, which helps you when you're troubleshooting these things. So no coding required, just configuration. And again, we've done it in a way that we can generalize as much as possible to connect to as many systems as possible. So first of all, let me go with Unisa. I think she has a question.
Yes, are you going to go into further explanation about how to reference the elements returned in the body through Build, that syntax?
Yeah.
I have a specific question, but
yes.
Say in your body you have a key that has a reference to a dot notation, and then it has a value. How do I identify that in the output? what would
Yeah.
the data path be?
You can actually implement the straight dot notation. So for instance, in this output, we have an advisor with an ID and label. We handle those specially, but if you wanted to access that advisor label directly, you could type in advisor dot label, and it'll connect to that data field directly. Does that answer the question?
Sort of. Now, mind you, I'm not an expert in JSON and I'm not an expert in build, but instead of advisor being the key, it says advisor.id, and then it gives me the value. When I put in advisor.id, it's saying it's invalid. So I'm guessing I'm not doing something right, but all the other ones are listed in the body like you have here in this example. So it just says quote ID and I can reference it. So I'm just kind of curious, do I have to put like a 0 dot? I mean, I'm trying a bunch of stuff and so far nothing's working. So for the autofill.
So this case
I
I'm
don't-
adding, it might be the gadget type that you're connecting to. Pretty much
okay.
for that thing, you need a text gadget.
Yep, I have a text gadget. I can show you what it looks like, but it was just weird because I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, because we don't get control over how the response is. And so when I see a strange response, like I said, it's new for me. And normally I see this body response looking this way, but is it possible that the JSON wasn't configured properly in the API endpoint? I mean, literally,
Possible.
okay.
There's another thing that sometimes happens is the other API, in this case, it's returning just a single JSON object. But oftentimes an API will always return an array of objects, even if there's only one.
Yeah.
And if we had an array there and have objects within that array, and we know there's really only one, but they just return an array, you can access that by putting in dot notation to access the first item in the array, like that. In this case, it's going to blow everything up. But so if I wanted to reference the first item in an array, I can put in the little square brackets with the index number of the item I want to reference. And you can do that layers deep. So if it's value, 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 and then an array nested deep, you could do value dot dot dot, and then your array number with the 0 to reference the single item.
Okay. The brackets are optional.
I think they are.
Okay. That did work for one portion of it, but when it got nested, I couldn't get it to work. So the dot notation, all of my endpoints seem to be referencing array, even though it doesn't have like a label or key. So the dot was working just fine in it. I love the autofill, by the way. But I just came across an instance where the notation was a little different nested. So it wasn't an array within an array, but one of the array values was like advisor.id was literally the key.
Yeah.
And it won't return. So I can ask later. I was just curious if I just didn't understand the
sounds like you understand
syntax.
It. It's just, yeah.
Okay,
Something's
that's
tripping
cool.
us up there.
I'll bug Casey later.
Yep. So Shelley asked the question if we could pull data from other Kuali modules, and the answer to that is absolutely yes. And so I've already shown you an example of connecting to Kuali curriculum management, and in just a little bit I'm going to show you an example of connecting to Kuali research to pull some data. And so within the limits of the APIs of those modules, then we can pull other data from other systems, and that's an area that we're going to continue to improve on in the future to facilitate connecting system to system between Kuali systems as well as other systems. Any other questions about this configuration?
I'm going to ask a dumb question. When we have student ID in the integration URL, is that because the JSON column name has been set on that field in the form to student ID?
Yeah, so the this API requires that the student ID be passed as part of the URL. And by defining it this way and defining this URL input, then in the form, when I'm configuring, that's what tells the form that, hey, we need a student ID in order for this to work. Where do we get the student ID? And that's how you map that and link those two together. And we support query parameters, which are a little bit different than URL parameters. They're supported as well. Okay, let me jump, and I'm going to jump into a more detailed example. Let's see. We're going to build an add drop request, which does a bit more than what the program change request did. So in this case, I've got 5 data sources that are already preset up for me that I'm going to access. I've got that student information one that we already had. I have a year term API where I can get the official list of years and terms for the institution. I have a classes API that requires a year term input, but allows me to search against that list of classes. And then for a given year term and class, I can search, find the list of sections that are available for that. I can also have an API, a data source for a current classes for a given student. And so that allows me to get their current class schedule. So in the drop case, it makes it really easy to select the course they already have and to be able to drop it. So those are 5 data sources that again are like set up and configured by the technical staff in this scenario. And they're vetted and set up like that. One of the important things about these data sources is once they're configured, they're usable across multiple applications. So they can be used and they're reusable. And so I can use that student information record wherever it makes sense. So let's go build that. So I'm going to add a new application. I'm going to call it add drop request. And we'll just take the defaults. And let's do drop first. Well, let's look up the student's name first. That's a good thing to know for what we're dropping here. And so let's do that data lookup single item again. And I'm going to call that student. And we'll connect to that student information data source again that's prompting for the student ID. And when I hit that, I got to map that. And I'm going to map, in this case, to the school ID on the logged in user. So then we want to drop a class. And so to do that, let's create a section for drop and call it drop class. And I'm going to use a data lookup list, and we'll call it class, and we'll choose that, and we're going to get current classes. So this is a data source that's returning the list of current classes for a given student. And again, I've got to map that field to the student ID. In this case, we use the school ID for the logged in user. And there I can get the list of Jamie's current class load, which allows me to easily select the class that I want to drop. I also have additional information for the auto-linked field gadgets. And so I can do something like add the course code and the number of credits, which might be helpful in this decision to drop. And that's all we need for a drop form. Let's do an add form. That's a bit more complicated. So I'm going to drop this out here and call it add class. And in here, we need, first of all, we need to know the year term that we're working in. And so we're going to pull a data lookup list and call it year term. And we'll choose a source. And we have a year term source that we mentioned that was already configured. And that allows me to get a drop down with the supported year terms. And after year term, we want to create a place for them to search for a given class. And so I'm going to load up another data lookup list, call this one class. We'll choose a data source. In this time, we're going to just connect to the classes list, to the entire classes data source. It wants the year term to search for. And so I'm going to connect to that year term field on the form. So in this case, I can now choose fall 2020. I can search on history and I can find a class from that system. There's additional data available from that. And so I can pull like a class description and number of credit hours and the department that it's involved with. And when I connect those all up and select one of those, see that it automatically will fill in with that information to give the student more information in this choice that they're about to make. So then we want to select the section. And I'm going to pull another data lookup list for that and call it section. And we'll choose here, and we have a data source called sections. And the sections is going to ask for a specific class ID to create sections for, and a year term to be able to connect that to. So I'll connect those two, and we'll connect to the class ID of the item that we just added. And I want class ID. And for year term, we're going to connect to that year term. So in this case, I'm connecting this section field to what is selected in this class field and what is selected in the year term field. And so this won't fill out until I fill those things in, but because they're already filled out, you can see that I already have a section in there. A section number by itself isn't very helpful. And so we have some additional fields that are available. In this case, I can pull up the instructor and I can pull up seats available, which might be useful. And when I choose those two, with some more work, you'd also have like days and times, like the schedule for this section, so you know when it's happening. We could autofill that as well on this form. And so in this case, I'm creating this kind of cascading thing where I have to select a year term, and then I can search for a class, and then I can search for select a section within that class. And so we can chain things together by connecting the different data gadgets together. Now, if we look at a completed form I've got one already a little bit more polished. And then you can start to use things like conditional visibility to do things like, do you want to add or drop? And I'm going to add. So it'll show just the add piece, allow us to do those searches and get that information, get that section to that piece. Or I can just do the drop and it'll simplify the form again and make it a simpler process for the student. That's a little bit more involved case and involves connecting data gadgets with each other in order to facilitate the outcome that we want. Any questions there?
Yeah, when you were building that, how did you determine which field was actually which when you were doing the link? Because it looks like you had class and class as the same field twice. And I noticed when you were looking at when you were building that second one in the add class, there was the prerequisite of there has to be a class or something selected, and you chose which one that was connected to. How did you tell the difference? Yeah, like there, the class ID.
You need the class ID, and you'll see there's a class object and there's fields on that. And you're right, there's a class code, there's a class ID, and there's also a course ID on this data. And I just, knowing the data behind the scenes, I have to kind of know the data, and I know that class ID is actually the ID that is needed to look up section. So I have to know a little bit about this data source in order to know that course ID and class ID are actually two different things.
Okay. Yeah, no, never mind. I see where my thought went wrong. I was for some reason thinking it was determined on fields already on there, but never mind. No, thank you. That answers the question.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. This list that I'm looking at is the entire set of data that's available, which is not always shown on the form. Some data is not shown on the form and doesn't have to be. So that's like the person who's filling out the form is the person who created the form, we call it, created the document. And so you see there's a bunch of information like display name, school ID, email, username. Those are available, but they're not actually showing in the form. So we call those metadata, and there's a there's a set of metadata that can be attached to the document, kind of behind the scenes, and then used in workflow and workflow notifications and workflow logic, and can also be used in the reporting with the document list. See, there's another question of, how did you get the text box on the bottom of the form? Are you referring to this one here? So yes, I pull this read-only gadget, and the read-only gadget, I can just drop right at the bottom there, and then it'll pop in at the bottom and just get added to the bottom of the form. So people use the read-only gadget to add a lot of information to forms, instructions and details about. They also use it to add information around, like, this is everything you're agreeing to with all this legal documentation. So those are heavily used. Other questions?
Tad, I kind of had maybe a minor suggestion on the drop-down list. So like the, when you have the current program or even that class drop-down list that's pre-populated.
Yeah.
If there's only one option, if that could just be selected versus the user having to select it.
Oh yes, I so agree with you. I want to get that change done. We just haven't gotten it on the schedule quite yet, but I want that. We need that.
And then I guess another one would be, when you have to select the input for one of the integrations, that drop-down list could become super long and it's not ordered or sorted in any fashion.
Yep. We absolutely know we need to improve that. We need to make it searchable, because we have plenty of customers who are creating fields with hundreds of fields on them, our documents with hundreds of fields on them. So yeah, we have an improvement we need to make there.
Yeah, thanks.
I've got someone asking if we can show how to make the help question mark show in a form. Sure. So let's just add a simple text field here and call it my cool field. And then I can do the description help text is one of the options down here in the configuration for that. And I can choose, here's your help. And you'll see that by default, it'll show up right inside there. But if I choose display as help bubble, it'll turn into this little question mark that then has a hover state where you can see the little hover help. So that little display as help bubble checkbox helps you get the question marks and connect those to the field. We see a lot of customers using that to put a lot of embedded help, but not in your face help. Mahalo to you as well, Angela. Okay, so we got just a few minutes. I'm going to show you something cool. This is not finished. This is under development. We actually don't know a lot about how we're going to release this, but we think it'll be an add-on or additional product because it's adding some really rich capabilities. And so we don't know how we're pricing that or how we're figuring that. That's all still being sorted out. But I wanted to give you a preview of this problem that we're solving. And so I'm going to jump over to this thing. Actually, let me go through my slides so I can introduce this thing. So we have this thing, we're calling it lasso. And the metaphor is we're lassoing your data and doing stuff with your data to pull it together. And lasso is meant to solve some key things. One is oftentimes when you're connected to these other systems, as we've kind of hinted at here today, the data doesn't necessarily come in a way that's easily connected into Build. And sometimes you actually need to connect to multiple systems in order to pull the data together in order to display what you want on field. And today our current answer for that is middleware. That you got to write a little piece of middleware, which involves some code or a middleware platform, and then middleware is software that literally runs in the middle between two systems. And so middleware is a little piece of software that would connect to the other system, pull it, change the data, and then feed it into Build to be able to display it correctly on the form. And we know that you would prefer a different way, that writing middleware is not what you signed up for, many of you. And so we're looking at this Kuali Lasso product as a way of reducing the need for middleware. We may not get rid of all the need, but we can certainly reduce the need. And so let me give you an example of the problem this solves. So this is pretty technical, and I should be also clear about the intended user for the Lasso product is a technical person. We're not expecting the non-technical form designer person to be the one messing with Lasso. Lasso is about facilitating, making things easier for the technical person who's configuring those data sources at the lower level. And so I'm gonna, this is gonna get a little technical, so forgive me for that. So in this case, I'm connecting to a research API. And what I'd like to do is type in an award number, and I want to return the proposal number that's associated with that award number. And so that today requires 2 API calls to research. I have to make one API call where I feed in the award number and get the data about that. And in there, you can see that I get the proposal ID 7 is part of the data that's returned there. And then I can take that proposal ID 7 and hit another API, and there I can get the proposal number. And so that, I need to take data from 2 different APIs in order to get that. I should cover the value that this does have for the non-technical people, who are the people building forms. Even though you don't necessarily use Lasso, Lasso is going to facilitate the technical people setting up data sources faster and quicker, and having them write less code to do so. And that's a good thing. That speeds everybody up, and that's the problem that we're trying to solve there with Lasso. And so we need a way of creating a lookup that'll allow me to type in an award number and return a proposal number, and we need 2 API calls to actually do that. Our current data integrations today can only support 1 API call. So if I jump over to this screen, this is what Lasso looks like by default. It could take inputs, and then it can have outputs. And then in between those, I can add nodes. And so I can add a node, and I have a bunch of different nodes, and the nodes just do different operations on data going between the 2 systems. And so in there, I might insert an API call where I'm going to take data from this input and feed it into here to make an API call, and then I'm going to take the output and put it on that other system. I'm going to go to the completed API call for working with this research piece. Again, I'm just trying to give you a preview of this. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can zoom in and out on this. And so for our input, we are pulling from the form. We're going to ask for an award number. That's what's going to require, that this data source is going to require an award number in order to return the proposal number. And so I do what we call a compose message, where I take the award number and I feed it into a URL as a variable, as a parameter, and I create this URL that's formatted in the right way for connecting to the research system. And then I could feed that. I take these little things work like this. I just grab that and connect it there, and I feed that URL into the next API call. And this API call, I have the bearer token authentication set up for connecting to this other system, where this is going to be a real connection to another system. And then over there, if you remember, you need to watch this. This is the dot notation. If you remember back in our piece, that proposal ID is nested. It's nested inside of an array underneath all funding proposals. And you'll see also that that data actually comes back as an array. The entire thing is an array. And so I'm referring to item 0 in the array, and then the all funding proposals, and then .0 for the first item in that array, and then proposal ID. And so I use a split object node to be able to take the output from that API call and split off that one piece of data that I need. And then I compose that into the other URL, the second URL that I need to call. And I take that proposal ID and put it into there. I feed that URL into another API call, and I get the output of that. And I can do another split object and split off the proposal number that will come back in that second API call. And then I can connect those two so that they'll link. The proposal number will be output as the, in this case, the ID and the label for using this. And so in this way, I can connect these things, I can make these API calls, and I can configure all of this with just these nodes. I don't have to write any code. And more importantly, I don't have to like host a server to run this thing. We take care of all that for you. You don't have to host a server. You don't have to worry about monitoring. Is this thing still working? Those types of things. So if we test this, it's going to prompt for an award number. And I'm going to type in an award number that I just happen to have memorized. And you'll see it'll do its lookup. And if everything works right, it returns the proposal number for that API. And I could go and drop that in a form. We'll just pop that in a test form. And we'll put in a simple text field for collecting the award number. And then we'll pull a data lookup single item and call that proposal number. And we'll choose that institutional proposals data source. You'll note that the lasso data sources are connected right next to the other data sources that come from the basic integrations. We just meshed the two. In the end result, they work the same here in the form thing. You don't have to learn anything new for dealing with a lasso configuration. It's just a tool for helping the person configuring the low level integration piece there. So I'm going to connect that. It's going to ask for, well, where do I pull that award number? We're going to connect to the award number field. You'll see it's trying, but if I type in that little code, it automatically loads in the proposal number. So in that way, Lasso helps us connect, do a lot more robust connection, helps us reduce the need for middleware, helps us make multiple API calls, allows us to like change data as it's coming from the other system in order to put it into the right format to connect into Build. Those are all things that currently require middleware or a middleware platform to do. And we want to simplify that, make it easier. And that is my preview. We're kind of at limit, but if there are any open questions.
Sorry, I do have a quick question. With integration, is it only with APIs or can you also connect to other type of database sort of access points?
Yeah, since we currently don't connect to databases directly.
Okay, API.
API only. That's kind of part of what moving to the cloud does with us. We need to be able to connect to publicly accessible endpoints, and typically databases are not on public endpoints as they should be. They should be in a secure place. So we rely on APIs today to do that. However, with some coding, you can write middleware that would connect to that internal database, pull that data, and provide it in an API to our system. And we have customers who've done that type of thing as well.
Okay. My other question, it's kind of a random one. I'm getting a bunch of questions to ask suddenly through email. Is all these modules and apps supported through all different types of browsers and versions? Have you had issues with different browsers?
Yeah, so we support the current versions of Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Microsoft Edge. And the current versions of those, we support those four browser versions. We also support the mobile versions of those browsers on mobile devices. Our forms will automatically render nicely and lay out nicely on a phone or on a tablet. You don't have to worry about that. We automatically readjust things for you to make things work on mobile devices as well.
Great, thank you.
You bet. I'm looking at Eunice's piece here. All right. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed, and we will see you in other sessions.